Let's talk about those first 7 seconds, because they matter more than you think. Not just in dating or relationships, but in every area of life. But today, we're narrowing in on one of the most misunderstood dynamics in relationships, the avoidant attachment style. These are the people who might seem calm, aloof, composed, even emotionally absent. But here's the truth: they don't want you to know their initial response in those first 7 seconds of real emotional presence can expose everything they're trying to hide. Now, why 7 seconds? Why not 2 or 10 or a full conversation? Because when it comes to avoidance, you have a narrow window before the emotional walls shoot up. In those first few seconds, there's no time for calculated responses. There's no mask, at least not yet. What you get instead is something raw, something instinctive. Their body reacts before their brain does. And that is where the truth lies. Think of it like this. Every human being operates with two systems running simultaneously: the fast, unconscious system, what we might call the emotional brain, and the slower, more deliberate system, the rational brain. This is the foundation of what psychologist Daniel Kahneman refers to as System 1 and System 2 thinking. Avoidants by nature are pros at using System 2 to suppress or reframe their emotions. But in the first 7 seconds of emotional surprise, say eye contact that lingers a beat too long, or a heartfelt, "I miss you," System 1 takes the wheel, and it doesn't lie. Here's what happens physiologically. When you trigger a moment of connection with an avoidant, their nervous system gets hit before they have time to process it. Maybe they flinch. Maybe their voice falters. Maybe their eyes soften and then harden again. That shift, that's the emotional truth trying to surface before the ego slams the door shut. And look, I'm not telling you this so you can play psychologist in your relationship or interrogate your partner. That's not the point. The point is to recognize what's real, because too many people stay stuck in emotional limbo, waiting for words that will never come, while ignoring signals that were loud and clear, just subtle. Let's go a little deeper here. From a philosophical standpoint, there's something profoundly revealing about those micro moments. Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher, once said that anxiety is the dizziness of freedom, the tension between possibility and limitation. Avoidants live in that tension every day. The possibility of closeness excites them and terrifies them. And when you step into their emotional space, even for a moment, you ignite that inner conflict. What they do with that moment, how they react in that brief, unguarded space, tells you everything about the war they're fighting inside. This 7-second test, it's not about judgment. It's about discernment. You're not evaluating their worth as a person. You're just observing what the moment reveals. And trust me, it always reveals something. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. Most people think that if an avoidant pulls away, it means they don't care. That's not always true. In fact, many avoidants do care deeply, but that care threatens their identity. It makes them feel vulnerable. It challenges the belief system they've built around independence, self-sufficiency, and emotional control. So what do? They react, they freeze, they shut down, or they change the subject, make a joke, look at their phone, anything to escape the intimacy of the moment. But in doing that, they're telling you something incredibly important. That emotional connection is dangerous terrain for them. And you have to decide what to do with that information. You can't change someone's attachment style. You can't heal what they refuse to face. But you can stop pretending they're giving you more than they are. And that's where your power lies. See, most of us want clarity. We crave honesty, but we look for it in the wrong places. We wait for big speeches, for grand gestures, for neatly packaged confessions. But the truth is rarely that theatrical. The truth is quiet. Subtle, it shows up in the micro reactions, the pauses, the flickers in someone's eyes when they're caught off guard. Especially if that someone is avoidant. So the next time you're in a moment like that, a moment that feels emotionally charged, even if no words are exchanged, pay attention. Don't analyze. Just observe. What happens in those 7 seconds will tell you more about their true feelings than 7 hours of conversation ever could. Because emotional truth doesn't shout. It whispers, and it always shows up first before the ego gets involved. You just have to be still enough and brave enough to see it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. If we're going to understand what the 7-second test actually reveals, we need to take a step back and get clear on who we're dealing with. Because this isn't just about watching someone flinch when you look them in the eyes. It's about recognizing the deeper emotional architecture behind that reaction. And that means understanding the avoidant attachment style, not at the surface level, but at the core. Most people here are avoidant and immediately jump to conclusions. Cold, distant, emotionally unavailable. And sure, those traits can show up. But labeling someone as avoidant and stopping there, that's lazy. The truth is more complex and more human. Avoidant attachment isn't a character flaw. It's a strategy. A psychological and emotional survival strategy built over time, often in childhood, when intimacy didn't feel safe or reliable. Let's unpack that. At the heart of the avoidant mindset is one simple, painful belief: if I get too close, I'll lose myself or get hurt. So rather than risk that loss or that pain, avoidants learn to rely on themselves. Emotionally, they become islands. Not because they don't want connection, but because connection feels risky. Love feels conditional. Vulnerability feels like exposure. And when you grow up believing that vulnerability equals danger, what do? You armor up. You become self-contained. You learn to meet your own needs so well that letting anyone else in feels unnecessary, maybe even threatening. Now, here's where things get really interesting. Avoidants don't lack emotions. In fact, many of them feel deeply. They just don't feel safe expressing those emotions, especially not in real time, especially not face to face. So what you get is a kind of emotional delay. You might say something meaningful, and instead of getting a response that matches the moment, you get distance. You get a shrug or a deflection or a quiet withdrawal. And if you don't understand what's happening beneath the surface, it's easy to take that personally. But that's the mistake. The distance isn't always about you. It's about them not knowing how to be close without feeling like they're losing control. And here's the paradox: avoidants do want love. They want connection. They want to be understood, just like the rest of us. But the way they go about protecting themselves from pain often keeps them from receiving the very thing they crave most. It's like trying to drink water without ever lowering your guard. You stay thirsty, even when the well is full. From a psychological standpoint, this is rooted in early attachment dynamics. When a child reaches out emotionally and gets met with rejection, unpredictability, or emotional unavailability, they stop reaching out. It's basic conditioning. Reach out, get burned. Stop reaching. So they grow up into adults who don't look needy. They don't ask for reassurance. They don't let you in, not all the way. But behind that self-sufficiency, there's often a profound fear of being seen and then rejected. That's the deeper truth. And here's why this matters for you. If you're emotionally invested in someone with avoidant tendencies, you can waste years trying to crack the code, trying to earn closeness, decode their silences, or chase down clarity that never arrives. You can start to confuse their protection strategy with your value. And that's where things get toxic, because your worth isn't measured by how much someone opens up to you. Your worth doesn't hinge on someone else finally choosing vulnerability. That's their inner work, not yours. Your job is to understand the pattern so you can stop internalizing it. So you can stop turning yourself into a detective and start becoming a decision maker. And I know what you might be thinking. But they're not cruel. They're not intentionally withholding. And that's often true. Avoidants aren't villains. They're people who learn to survive without leaning on others. And sometimes that very skill, their independence, their emotional control, is what draws you to them in the first place. But don't mistake strength for availability. Emotional strength doesn't mean much if there's no space for intimacy. This is why the 7-second test is so powerful. Because when you present a moment of intimacy to an avoidant person, real, grounded, heart to heart, you override their script for just a moment. You catch them off guard, and in that brief window, their true feelings can leak through. That's when you might see the flicker of longing, or fear, or discomfort. It's not about playing games. It's about witnessing the dissonance between what they feel and what they show. And once you witness that, you have to ask yourself, Am I willing to build a relationship on what's real, or am I still hoping for what's hidden? Because at the end of the day, avoidants aren't broken. They're just wired to protect themselves. And you're not broken either for wanting connection. But knowing this, truly knowing it, gives you the power to choose how you show up. Whether that means patience, boundaries, or walking away, that's up to you. Just don't confuse emotional resistance with emotional absence. Sometimes the heart is right there. It's just trapped behind a wall built long before you ever showed up. Let's get into the heart of this. Because now that you understand how avoidant attachment works and why those first 7 seconds matter so much, you're probably wondering, what exactly is this test? What am I looking for? How do I apply this in real life without turning my relationship into some kind of experiment? The 7-second test isn't a trick. It's not a trap. It's a mirror. It's a brief, intentional moment of intimacy that invites an unfiltered emotional response. And it works precisely because it's simple. We're not talking about grand romantic gestures or emotionally loaded speeches. We're talking about presence. A kind of grounded, emotionally available presence that most avoidants don't know how to tolerate for very long. So, what does it look like? It could be holding eye contact a little longer than usual. It could be saying something like, "I feel really connected to you right now," and letting that silence hang. It could be gently touching their hand during a quiet moment. These are small acts, but they carry a weight. Because what you're doing is stepping across the invisible line that the avoidant has drawn between you and them. And you're doing it without flinching. You're saying, through your presence, I'm here. I'm emotionally available. I'm not afraid of closeness. And then you wait just for a few seconds. You watch what happens next. That's the test. It's not about what they say. In fact, most of the truth you're looking for isn't verbal. It's in the micro expressions, the hesitation, the look in their eyes, the way they shift their body, break eye contact, or suddenly crack a joke to diffuse the moment. And sometimes what you'll see is a flicker of something they don't usually let you see: vulnerability, tenderness, or even fear. That flicker, that's the part of them they work so hard to keep hidden. And it only comes out when their usual defense mechanisms don't activate fast enough. That's why this test only works in a moment of genuine connection. You can't force it. You can't fake it. If your energy is performative, if you're doing it to get a reaction or manipulate their behavior, they'll sense it. Avoidants are incredibly sensitive to emotional pressure. They'll shut down even faster. But if you're present, clear, and grounded in yourself, the moment creates a kind of emotional dissonance for them. On one hand, they want to stay in control. On the other hand, something inside them is drawn to what you're offering, real connection. And in that brief internal conflict, something true emerges. Now, let's talk about what that truth might look like. Sometimes you'll see them soften. Maybe they don't say much, but they lean in a little. They don't pull away. Their face relaxes. That moment of softness, that's a signal. It doesn't mean they're ready for a full emotional breakthrough, but it means something inside them is responding to you. That matters. Other times, you'll get the opposite. They'll freeze. Their energy will shift. They'll distract themselves, change the subject, or even get annoyed. And that, too, is a signal. It doesn't mean they don't care. It means the moment pushed them into unfamiliar territory. They were emotionally seen, even for a second. And that can be terrifying for someone who's built their identity around emotional control. So, what do you do with that information? You don't judge it. You witness it. And then you decide whether the version of them that showed up in that moment, the vulnerable one or the one that's shut down, is someone you can build a life with. Because people don't change unless they want to. And no amount of effort on your part will create emotional safety for someone who's not willing to step into it with you. Let me be clear, this is not about calling someone out. It's about calling reality in. It's about giving yourself permission to see clearly instead of constantly second-guessing what someone's silence or emotional distance might mean. It's about stepping into your power and saying, I trust what I saw, and I'm not going to gaslight myself out of it. Philosophically, this goes even deeper, Because when we talk about intimacy, we're really talking about the human desire to be known, to be seen as we are without armor. And what this test does, if you allow it, is force the question, can this person sit with me in emotional truth, even for 7 seconds? If the answer is no, that doesn't mean they're bad. It just means they're not ready. And you have to decide what your boundaries are around that. You have to decide whether you're building something real or whether you're still waiting for a version of them that only exists in your imagination. Because here's the thing, love isn't what someone says when they're calm, when they've had time to craft a message or compose their thoughts. Real love is what leaks out when the mask slips, when they don't have time to hide, when you see their instinct, not their image. And once you've seen someone's instinct, you've seen the truth. Let's talk about the reaction. Because once you've created that moment, once you've done the 7-second test and watched how the avoidant responds, it's easy to get caught in confusion. You might start asking yourself, did I see what I think I saw? Or what does it mean if they pulled away? Does that mean they don't care? And this is where most people get it wrong. We're so conditioned to equate emotional closeness with comfort, with softness, that we forget how real intimacy, especially for someone with avoidant attachment, doesn't always show up as warmth. Sometimes it shows up as fear. Sometimes it shows up as resistance. Sometimes it shows up as silence. But that doesn't mean nothing's happening. You're not watching their words in that moment. You're watching their nervous system. You're watching what happens when their emotional armor gets briefly cracked open and something vulnerable slips through. And depending on how long they've relied on that armor, what you see might not be pretty. It might not be romantic. It might not even look like they care. But what it is real. Let's break this down. If they soften even slightly, you're seeing that disarmed version of them. You're seeing their real capacity for connection, for vulnerability. It might not last long. It might vanish the second you try to follow up. But if you catch even a flicker, if they hold your gaze, or touch your hand, or get quiet in that way people do when their emotional truth rises to the surface, you've seen the side of them they rarely let anyone witness. That moment is gold. Not because it promises transformation, but because it confirms the presence of real feeling underneath all the avoidance. On the flip side, if they freeze, retreat, or immediately deflect, don't rush to judgment. That reaction doesn't necessarily mean they're indifferent. It usually means the emotional discomfort has spiked. What they're trying to do, often unconsciously, is restore control. Avoidants associate emotional closeness with vulnerability and vulnerability with risk. So when you show up with emotional presence, their brain doesn't go, wow, this feels meaningful. It goes, warning, too close. Shut it down. It's like their system short circuits. And that shutdown, that's not proof they don't feel. It's proof they feel too much and don't know how to manage it. Now, sometimes the response is more subtle. Maybe they crack a joke. Maybe they suddenly look at their phone. Maybe they say something sarcastic or change the subject entirely. These are avoidance tactics. They serve a single purpose, emotional regulation through distraction. And if you don't understand what's happening, you'll take it personally. You'll think, wow, I just tried to be real with them, and they made fun of it. But when you understand the pattern, you see it for what it is, an old reflex, a deeply ingrained fear response. And here's the hard truth. If you're not emotionally grounded, you'll chase them. You'll try to explain the moment, make them feel safe, get them to talk about it. You'll start working overtime to fix the reaction, hoping it means something more than it does. But in doing that, you abandon yourself. You leave your side of the connection to manage theirs, and that's not love. That's emotional outsourcing. So here's what I want you to remember. Their reaction is information, not a riddle. You don't have to decode it. You just have to witness it. That moment, raw and unrehearsed, is giving you a rare glimpse into their emotional landscape. It's telling you everything you need to know about their readiness, their capacity, their fears, and your job isn't to fix it. Your job is to decide what to do with what you've seen. And this is where the philosophical layer comes in, because we've been taught that love means effort, patience, endurance. And yes, love does require work, but not contortion. Not emotional self-abandonment. Kierkegaard said, life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. If you keep replaying the moment hoping to find a different meaning, you'll stay stuck in emotional limbo. But if you accept what the moment revealed, you can move forward with clarity. There's one more thing. Don't overstay in potential. Potential is seductive. It's built on hope, imagination, and your own emotional investment. But the 7-second test doesn't show you potential. It shows you reality. It shows you whether someone can hold intimacy without flinching. And if they can't, that's not your failure. That's just where they are. Let them be where they are. And honor where you are. Because the way someone reacts to emotional closeness tells you more than any carefully worded text ever will. It shows you not just how they feel about you, but how they feel about themselves in the presence of intimacy. That's the real story. And you can't edit someone else's story, but you can choose not to be written into a chapter that keeps repeating itself. So when the mask slips, pay attention. Because the reaction you see is the truth most people spend a lifetime trying to hide. Let's talk about what happens after the moment. After the 7 seconds. After the flicker, the freeze, the softness, the shutdown, whatever reaction you witnessed. This is where your power lies, even if it doesn't feel like it at first. Because that tiny moment you just shared, it wasn't just about exposing their truth. It was about clarifying yours. And the real question isn't, what do they feel for me? It's, what do I do with what I just saw? This is the part we don't talk about enough. We want tests, signs, strategies. But all of those are tools. They're only as useful as the action you take with them. Emotional insight without action is just emotional clutter. And the moment you run the test, the second you invite real intimacy and watch how it lands, you're holding a mirror to your own emotional standards too. You're no longer guessing or projecting. You're seeing things clearly. That's the gift. The hard one, the one most people avoid because clarity carries responsibility. It's easier in a strange way to keep dancing around ambiguity, to say, they're just complicated, or they've been hurt before. That may be true, but when you use someone's past to justify staying in a present that leaves you emotionally starving, you've stopped honoring yourself. Compassion doesn't mean self-abandonment. And understanding someone's pain doesn't mean excusing the way it spills onto you. Here's what you need to realize. People will show you their emotional ceiling early on, and often they'll show it in a moment just like this. A moment when you offer something real and they shrink from it, or dismiss it, or meet it for a second, then retreat. That's their ceiling. That's the height of connection they know how to tolerate right now. Could it change? Maybe. But growth is only possible if it's chosen. And it can't be your job to drag someone past their limits just because you see who they could be. This is where the real work begins. Not with them, but with you. Because the truth is, you're not just asking, do they love me? You're asking, can they meet me where I am? And if the answer is no, you have to be brave enough to stop performing emotional CPR on something that keeps going cold. This takes courage, especially if you're an empath, especially if you've been the fixer, the one who sees the best in people and believes that with enough patience, things will change. That's beautiful. But here's the philosophical truth. You don't build relationships on someone's potential. You build them on what's consistent. Consistency is the real measure of emotional safety. It's not how someone acts when the sun is out. It's how they show up when things get close. When you drop the mask, when you look them in the eyes and speak your truth, the way they handle that moment, that's who they are with you. Not who they could become, not the version of themselves they talk about when they're feeling aspirational, but the version that shows up right now. When you invite depth, and once you've seen that version, you have to stop pretending you haven't. This is what most people do. They override their own intuition. They gaslight themselves into giving it one more chance, one more test, one more explanation. They tell themselves that emotional distance isn't rejection, it's just fear. And again, maybe it is. But the impact is the same. You're still alone in the space where you're supposed to be met. At some point, you have to ask yourself, am I choosing this because it's real or because it's familiar? Because if you grew up around emotional unavailability, parents who were distant, inconsistent, unpredictable, there's a good chance that part of you finds it oddly comforting. You know how to navigate it. You know how to earn love that's hard to get. That's what you were trained to do. But the truth, love isn't meant to be earned. It's meant to be shared. And if the test shows you that the person in front of you can't or won't share that space, then the most loving thing you can do is step away. Not to punish them, not to manipulate them into waking up, but to return to yourself. Because the 7-second test isn't about catching someone in the act of avoidance. It's about catching yourself in the habit of settling for less than you deserve. It's about waking up to the fact that emotional intimacy requires two people who are willing to stand in that space, raw, unguarded, and honest. So yes, the test reveals their truth, but more importantly, it reveals yours. And once you know what you know, you don't unknow it. You choose. You lead. You act, not out of fear, but out of self-respect.